When do you know that you have found a cause that you can get behind? At what point in time do you stick your flag into the ground and declare this is what you're going to work for? This is where you're going to devote your time, your energy, your voice. Thank you for tuning in. This is your time to come alive. My name is Valerie Hope, and I am your host. And this is a weekly conversation that you can experience being more conscious, getting more connected, and hopefully, as a result, even more creative in all different areas of life. Each week, I have the blessing of having wonderful guests I have an opportunity to speak to, connect with, and also learn more about. And today is no exception. Today, I'd like to introduce to you Billy Lane. And Billy and I go way back. I don't know how far back now. A couple years now, Billy, would you say?
Something like that. Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
like
Something
that.
like that. Yeah.
And and Billy has the fortune. I'm going to say that because I'm going to get extra points. I'm being married to a great friend of mine, Janet Morrison Lane. And that's how we met, Billy. Because I think there might have been just one of those moments where we hosted something for
Yeah.
the Eagle Scholars Program that Janet is responsible for. And I was there, and then we had an opportunity to meet. But after meeting you, I realized how passionate you were about a lot of social justice issues. Right? You mentioned to me that race equity, that poverty, these are
Hmm.
all areas
Right.
that somehow sparked an interest in you. So I thought,
Right.
oh, this might be a really interesting conversation. In spite of the fact that you try to weasel out of it.
Uh-oh, not me.
Okay,
Not
not
me.
weasel out, but you found creative ways to extend the timeline. Because I've
Called deferment.
defer, yes, that's a good word. Defer this conversation long enough. So I'm so happy to have you on the show. Welcome. Is there anything
Good to
else we
be
should
here.
know about you?
So you're talking about how we met. So Valerie, come on now. After a while, I had to ask my wife, who have you been talking to for 2.5 hours? I mean, all I've heard is this laughing and cackling and going on. And I was like, who are you talking to? Valerie. I was like, okay. Uh, does she have a last name? I mean, who is this person? So, so when I finally met you, I was like, okay, I get it. I get
See?
it.
And we don't just laugh and cackle. We have very meaningful conversations.
You do.
Meaningful conversations. We are
You
changing
do.
the world.
You are. You're definitely changing the world.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for being such an understanding husband that you you just create some space for that conversation to take
That's
place.
right. That's right.
Well, first of all, let's start with this, Billy. One thing is, I know that you're kind of reserved guy, right? You don't necessarily wave the flag about a lot of things. So, well, let's start with your T-shirt first of all. We just call it out. Show us the T-shirt. Black votes matter. Thank you. Good,
Yeah.
good. And
And on the back, you can't see the back, but on the back, it
uh-huh.
has Voting Rights Amendment 1965.
Okay. And tell us, why did you choose to wear that T-shirt?
So this was actually me, my wife, and our daughter Ruby. We had these shirts designed and made for
Of
us
course you did.
by a talented young lady named Tiffany Johnson, who is very close to our family. And we each the reason we had it made was funny because during our vacation a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that our 13-year-old daughter wanted to do was a photo shoot. Now, of course, you know me. You haven't known me long, but you know me well enough to know. I ain't about no in front of
No
If you
parasols or
no
leaning
no,
on a
if you
stump.
look on my Facebook page, there's probably 4 pictures of me, and I probably took one, and so no, that's just not me. But she insisted, so I said, okay, I got it. Baby girl wants to do this, so I got to go along with it. And she wanted us to dress alike, and so she said, why don't we have T-shirts made? And it was a very good idea, and so we all had a chance to choose what we wanted on the front, on the back, and whatnot. And so this, for me, this is where I am, and that's why I wanted it printed. And so when I knew I was going to be talking to you, I thought this is what I want people to know. You can way beyond what I do for a living, if it's of any import whatsoever. this is what's important. And I think the times that we're in are definitely bearing that out.
All right, there's a couple of things that I definitely want to unpack there. First of all, the fact that you had your 13-year-old daughter swayed you to do something that you're not generally comfortable with. So that's kudos to you, Ruby. Good job. Then the second piece is that you actually had a T-shirt designed, right? And that's not quite surprising to me because this you and Janet by far are some of the most committed and people who speak with conviction about whatever you decide to get behind. So what was it about this message in particular that had you go out and design a T-shirt? Barring the fact that you were wanting to dress alike, you could have worn like a denim shirt or a
We
white shirt, like a lot of people do.
absolutely,
So, what was it
absolutely.
about this message in particular that all of you got behind?
And their shirts are a little different. Their shirts have, the fist. In fact, my wife's shirt has the statement of John Lewis said that says "Get in good trouble."
Oh, that's a nice one.
Yeah, that's a very nice one. And so, but for me, this message, because this message has been one that I think I've applied myself to understand and study. What is it really going to take to close this gap on racial equity, and you know everything that I've studied and written and listened to, when you boil it down, it points back to this: we as Black people must vote. And I think, and someone else said it very, very well: if voting was not so important, then it wouldn't be any efforts to suppress it. But as you probably know, there are a myriad of efforts to suppress voting, particularly among minoritized people in this country, which tells you it does mean something. And so I know until we do this, um, you know, a lot is not going to change.
I get that. Yeah. So a couple things there. I listen, Billy. One is I want to know more about your voting and what was it that made that such an important stance? Because all of us, I think, know that we can vote in this country as a citizen once you're 18 years old. There was something in particular about voting that's made it a passion project for you, number one. And then the second, you mentioned the term minoritized. So I want to let's go with that first. What did you mean by minoritized?
So I don't, because so first of all, I kind of tell you where this comes from. So I was very fortunate. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to uh, enroll at Southern Methodist University and major in human rights and social justice. And I got a very good education. I enjoyed it tremendously. It was, very challenging, thought provoking, a lot of things that I had never thought about. And so critical race theory was one of the things I had never heard of until, I got to SMU of all places. That's not where you expect to hear critical race theory, but nevertheless. And in some of those papers and books, they use the word minoritized because usually we refer to ourselves as a minority. Well, if you really look at it, people of color are not the minority. We're not. And so, you have to be careful how you use that term. So you say minoritized simply because that is what's been put up on us. We've been treated as if we are a small portion, and the reality is no, we're not.
Interesting. So it's a very intentional use of the word that has
Hmm.
been applied to,
Exactly.
and it sounds like it could be. I'm making an assumption here. You didn't say this, but it applied to diminish, to demean, to
Absolutely. Right.
subdue
Right.
the contribution, like
Right.
of people of
Right.
color. Okay,
Exactly.
got that. And now, oh, there's you just anytime you say anything, Billy, I feel like I have 20 more questions to follow up. But I want to go back to the original one, beyond the minoritized term. When you're 18 years old when you were given the right to vote, right? Like every
Hmm.
American citizen here. Tell us about that moment, if there was a moment per se, and why and how did you determine that it was something important enough to make a T-shirt for?
At 18, it was absolutely, you know what, that's a, it's a hard question, Valerie.
I know it is.
On one
You don't
side,
have to know. You don't have to know the answer to that. I don't. I couldn't answer it for you.
on one side at 18, voting was not even that did not ring a bell. But on the other side, it did. So here's the long and short of the story. So when I graduated high school, didn't know what I wanted to do. This was college was not even on my radar at all, for a number of reasons. And so I thought, I wanted to go to the military. And, some of my church colleagues said, well, okay, now wait a minute, if you're going to go to the military, go to someplace like the Air Force Academy, because you could still, get some education, you build a military, yada, yada. Well, I said, I don't know nothing about no Air Force Academy, how to apply, yada, yada, yada. Somewhere, I got some information that said, in order for you to get in a military academy, you have to have a recommendation by a U.S. congressperson. And I thought, is that all? Why didn't you say so at first? Of course, I don't know. I've never, I've never seen a U.S. congressperson, aside from what's on TV. So I'm sitting around the house, watching TV, chilling, and somebody rings the doorbell. I go to the door, and it's a young man, a young Caucasian man. He's saying, I'm here, knocking on doors for Congressman John Bryant. I still remember his name, Congressman John Bryant. See if we can get your vote. Blah 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 blah. And I said, and I took his literature and I closed the door. I said, okay, I closed the door. I took about 5 steps, and I thought, he said Congressman. And I flew to the door and literally ran down the street and caught him. I mean, in the middle of the street, Valerie. Ran down the street and caught him. I said, look, you want me to vote for this dude? I'm trying to get in the Air Force Academy. What can he do? He said, well, I'll let him know. And so that was that. About, I don't know, 2 weeks later, I had an interview with the board for the Air Force Academy.
Wow.
Yeah. Now it was bittersweet, because although he made the interview possible, he made some phone calls, and somebody called me and said, okay, come on in. I wasn't prepared. I needed a program like my wife's, because I had no clue what they were going to ask me, how to answer, none of that. I'm just, I'm 18. The first job I had was because my uncle got it for me. He talked to the store manager and boom. So I have no clue about interviewing and answering these questions. So anyway, although I did get the interview, I didn't get in. But that planted enough in me to say, okay, when you voting, you're on the radar, you are seen, you are, voting. I don't know whether this is sad or not, but voting has to do with personhood, because if you ain't voting, you are invisible. And so that somewhat stayed with me along the way. It wasn't always consistent, just because, of all the partisanship, trying to figure out, Republican, Democrat, and oh my God, this actually probably helped. So I had an uncle. He passed away, but loved him. But we disagreed vehemently. He was a diehard Republican. So if you could believe, an African American young man that grew up in Jim Crow South, a diehard Republican, that's what he was. I mean, to the point where when certain congressmen came to town, they would call him and say, hey, come on over. I mean, it was that bad. And of course, I'm sorry, my computer's acting up here. There we go. And of course, we would get in these big argument discussions, every family reunion. And he would say to me, nephew, how can you be a Christian and vote Democrat? That's exactly what he would say to me every time I see him. Don't you know, blah, 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 blah. And he'd go down that long list that you've probably heard about, killing babies and yada, 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 yada. And so, interestingly enough, that was probably enough.
You should be careful about saying killing babies, yada, yada,
Yeah,
yada.
I know. Yeah, that's not the way to put it. But yeah, abortion, that's the way I should say. Yeah. I think that antagonism that antagonism was enough to keep that on my radar, because what I saw in him was he was working it. He, he was working it. And, uh, and my uncle was, he was a businessman. Most of it was legitimate. Some of it was not. But he was working the system. He really was. And I say this because, again, I loved him, appreciated him, with all my heart. But yeah, some of his business was not legitimate. But he, nevertheless, this country boy learned that if you want to, get ahead and get some advantage, here's how you work it. And he did. He worked it to his advantage. So that was enough to say to me, okay, I don't want to do it that way, but I can't, I do not have the luxury of being disconnected from our democratic process. And so I stayed engaged.
That's interesting. So how did you, especially with such vehement opposition, how did you decide that you wanted to move in a more to a more democratic, more liberal leaning politic?
So probably a couple of things early on. I remember this so vividly. In 1980, the presidential election, 1980. And this is when we had all the turmoil with the Middle East crisis and the oil crisis and whatnot, and President Carter was trying to navigate this, and we're sitting in lines that are literally a mile long to get gas, and depending on your license plate number. I don't know if you were in the United States at this time.
No, not yet.
So there was a time when, because of the gas shortage, depending on what your license plate number was, what number it ended, you could get gas on certain days you couldn't. And so that's how they rationed it. And so all this was very, very vivid, because I just could feel the anxiety of both my parents, who both worked full time. And then when Reagan became president, when he won the election, my mom just put her head down and said, "Oh no, oh gosh, we're in trouble." And lo and behold, 40 years later, as I look back on it, what I read, she was exactly right. She wasn't, she was far from a college professor, but she read the cards right, and she knew what was coming. And so I have that memory. But then, later on, what I think kind of where it really began to change my trajectory in terms of, being, more active in our democratic process, was when I began working for an urban ministry here in Dallas, a very large one that's well known, whose name I will not mention right now. And the leader of that organization was very much a mentor to me, and he was a preacher, and of course I was too. That's how we met, and he began to help me look at scripture in a totally different way. Uh, Coming from a conservative evangelical background, I looked at scripture as this is right, this is wrong. It's about individual morality. It's about thinking good thoughts, thinking positive thoughts. Don't smoke, don't drink, don't have sex before you're married. Those were the three big things. Everything in the Bible oriented around that. And so,
Forget the Ten Commandments. Those are the three.
yeah. You got it. That's right. Forget what the Ten Commandments say. Forget, forget the prophets and the Psalms and all these things that God talks about in terms of fairness. Forget all that. Just if you can keep with those three things and go to church, 3 times a week, which is when my mother took me. I was in church 3 times a week: Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday night. Then you were pretty much on the heaven track. And he and I love my mother, and I respect that those were loving people. I got to a point where I knew I did not any longer share their views. And so this particular gentleman, growing up in the same denomination, understood, and he had made that migration himself years ago, and he really and he enforced it on me. He challenged me. He gave me literature to read, and I eventually arrived at this perspective of scripture where I am now, that it is about liberation. It is about equity for all. And the Bible has tons to say about that, and how we treat people and the systems that we create. The Bible has tons to say about that. And so that really put me on the trajectory of equity and justice. And I mean, that's how I met my wife, because we were immersed in the same water, trying to figure that out, what that means, how to go about it. And so, yeah, that's what did it.
Wow, that was such a rich history and all these different influences.
There's a
Who
lot of different
knew
influences.
that a
Yeah.
knock on your door by a random door to
That's
door
right.
person
That's
peddling
exactly right.
boats
Right.
would
There you
impact
go.
you so much?
Yeah.
That would impact you so much. And then it sounds like all these different conversations
Hmm.
that you engaged in that really helped shape and form
Right.
who you are and what you believe and how you
Right.
went about expressing that.
Hmm.
So talk to us a little bit about this idea that you were really, it sounds like, really attracted to, or found ways to support what you were already attracted to by looking at equity and how that shows up. You were able to pinpoint how that shows up in the Bible, for example. And you're also a preacher. We hadn't
I
even
am.
talked about that. I don't know
I
if we'll
am a
have
preacher.
a moment to go into that, but tell us about what was it that you started to read, and what impact did that reading or that realization have on what you did with that information?
So, I began reading um, uh, commentators, biblical commentators, who were not a part, some of them, I'll put it this way, were not a part of the denomination that I grew up in. Some of them were. But what's interesting is they were usually voices that, the mainstream within our denomination would say, no, you don't want to read that. No, no, he ain't, mm-mm, mm-mm. And so I began to read these things, and I thought, no, wait a minute, he's making some sense here. He has a point here. When you look around, and he's got a really good point. Um, Thankfully, I was introduced to uh, community organizing, and I think this is where it really took root. I was introduced to community organizing. There's an organization here in Dallas called Dallas Area Interfaith, and introduced to that, and it was interesting because, again, these strange knocks on my door. A gentleman, I was in my office because I was a full-time preacher at that time. A gentleman knocked on my door and said, "I'm so and so. I'm from Dallas Area Interfaith." I was like, "Okay, I don't know what that is. What do you want?" And so he said, "Well, have you? How much do you know about the schools here in Dallas?" I said, "Oh, I'm a product of the public school system. You know, do you think it's good? Do you think it's really serving all children, equally?" And I was like, I don't know. And he said, "Would you be willing to come and take a walk with me?" I said, "Sure." So literally, we went out the front door of my office, went down the street, and started knocking on doors to see if any adult had children that attended the public school. And if so, would they mind us coming in and having a conversation? Now, when he told me that, I thought, you must be crazy. You are in a part of town. Do you know what part of town you're in? Number one, nobody, is gonna let you in their house to sit down and talk. You'd be lucky if we don't get shot. And so, and so he said, let's just try it. First door we knocked on, Hispanic mother, told her what we wanted. She says, "Come on in." I'm like, two men now, two
Yeah.
men. She was at home by herself. "Come on in." And so we sat down and talked, and yes, I have a child. She goes to that school down the street. I worry about her, getting to school safely. I worry about the traffic. I worry, she doesn't speak good English. All these things began to come up, and then he took me to a meeting where all these different organizers like him came together. And then they started sharing these stories about the people they talked to. And then the next meeting, they brought those people to the meeting, and those people told their story. And then before you knew it, they invited school board people to tell that story too. And then before I knew it, they were inviting, other elected officials to tell. I'm like, how did this thing start? Where did this come from? And
A knock
so,
on the door.
yeah, not these knocks on the doors, I'm telling you. And so that really, that spoke to me, and laying that alongside of the way I began to read the Bible as not a prescriptive document, but a descriptive document of how do the people of God, structure their systems such that they are fair, they are redemptive, they are loving. What does that mean? And once I began to deal with that question, then the natural question was, what does that mean in terms of education? Does that mean that, because the evidence was already out, if you live in a certain neighborhood and have a certain income, you're probably going to get a better education. Whereas if you don't, your education is probably not going to be as good. And I started looking back at my own education. I love my school, but I thought, you know what? I went through a huge high school. My graduating class was 880 people.
Mm.
And all I remember was no one ever sat down with me and said, what are you going to do after high school? Do you know about college? Would you like to go to college? Do you even know what a college is?
Mm.
No one had that conversation with me. Now, they had that conversation with the football players, the starting football players. And they would, they come in the locker room and say, yeah, look what I got. I got a letter from the school. And so my whole concept was, okay, that must be who college is for, because I don't play football and ain't nobody talk to me about it. So, oh well. And so just connecting those dots told me that, here is a very practical situation, education, where it is not equitable. What should people of faith be doing about it? Because we don't have the luxury of saying, oh, well, my kid is fine, because I can look in the scripture and clearly see that's not the choice we have. If it is lopsided, which it is, there's an obligation for us to demonstrate our love and loyalty to the creator that we call upon and make this system right. That is what love is about.
Wow, that's really powerful. So really thinking about the responsibility of a human being is to make life for other humans work.
That's right.
That's essentially what you're saying.
That's right.
And then this is driven by the faith that you have. And then faith begets action. So
Faith
what are
begins
some
action.
of the actions that, knowing that and seeing that was really planted in your heart, that's the responsibility that you had to further and take on? What kind of things did you start doing yourself?
So not nearly enough, Valerie. I'll be honest with you. I have this, within myself, I have this ongoing struggle that you have not done nearly, not just nearly enough, but I mean, next to nothing. I mean, it sometimes feels like I've been standing still, but I can tell you what I've tried to do. What I've tried to do in every context I've been in is ask the critical questions that put the issue on the table and keep it there until it's dealt with. And sometimes that's welcome, sometimes it's not. And so when I say that, whether it's in town hall meetings, which I've been in a lot with city council people, whether it's in meetings, one-on-one meetings with school board trustees, the biggest battleground, being a preacher, is the church. And I think that's what amazed me, is that, I would think if there's a place you shouldn't have to fight, there shouldn't be any argument over this, it would be the church. Well, no, that is what I found out, that is the main battlefield where the argument is, because, even among people of color, we are more than capable of gravitating away from taking care of our own people and blaming the victim, if you will. And so to try to ask some critical questions, such as, okay, if so-and-so needs help with rent, okay, it could be that he or she made some bad decisions. That's usually where it goes in church. But then I say, now, wait a minute. There's probably in this city, there's probably 10,000 more just like so and so. Did they all make bad decisions? You know, what's really going on here? And that's the kind of conversation that I've tried to keep on the table, particularly as I preach, as I teach, as I work one-on-one with, you know, with young people. I try to keep that issue on the table. And you know, I think every person has to, you know, figure out how they're going to answer that, but you can't say you didn't know, because I, you know, if you were around me, I put it on the table.
Wow. I mean, there's so much in there. I think one of the things that really stands out to me is your passion for, maybe you feel like you haven't done enough, but sometimes the doing is in actually bringing up stuff that people are uncomfortable talking about, or even acknowledging that there's something to be done, right? um, First of all, let's talk a little bit about what happens when you bring up and you keep those conversations on the table, because it sounds kind of juicy. So what are people saying, and as a retort, what are people not doing as a result? Like, what happens?
So it varies, right? It varies. As you observe, some people not trying to hear that. They want, you know, particularly when it comes to preaching, what they call biblical preaching. Uh, they want to hear about, you know, how to make sure that their marriage is going to be okay 10 years from now, and that's valid. I honor and respect that, and I do not ignore that. They want to hear, you know, how to make sure that their teenage daughter is not going to end up pregnant, or that their teenage son is not going to end up getting somebody pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they want to make sure that there's not infidelity, you know, running wild within the church, and all those are valid. Don't get me wrong. And so when you start bringing up these issues that are uh, uh, deeply connected to our, you know, our faith book, then you know, you get pushback. You get things like, well, you don't want to talk about real stuff. You want to talk about all that liberal stuff. You know, you want to talk about, you know, all, you know, social justice stuff, and that really ain't the Bible. That's the world. You know, it's that kind of
Wow.
dichotomy that
Yeah.
you sometimes get, and that's not from everybody. That, you know, you get a few, but then a few, there are those who, for the most part, they listen enough to ask questions, and that's my only point. That
Mhm.
is my only goal. If I can get you to keep asking questions on your own, then okay, I've done my job, because you got to work it out. I can't tell you necessarily how to work it out. What I do know, based on, you know, my study and where I am, is it takes collective action. I don't want to say there's no such thing, but you have to be careful about this idea of, well, you're right, Billy, you know, but did you know one person can make a difference in the life of another? I totally believe that. But when you're talking about changing a system, there has not been a system yet that has been changed apart from collective action of people.
Mhm.
And that's what I've been convinced of. And that's what you know, that's usually the next step in the process. If you're willing to keep asking, you know, okay, healthcare, what do you mean? You know, you know, my healthcare is high. Well, that may be true, but you got some who don't have it at all. And do you know what happens when a person without insurance walks into an emergency room? Do you really know what happens? And so, you know, to keep that dialogue on, and okay, what do we do about it? Well,
Yeah.
we really can't do anything. That's them people in Washington, and that's, you know, the church ain't got nothing to do with that. We don't want to get involved in politics. Well, to not get involved is political.
Mm.
So when you make a decision to ignore it or to neglect it, you're being just as political as you are when you make a decision to get involved. There's no such thing as being apolitical.
I get that. I think it's interesting you mentioned collective action. And then a lot of the topics that well, not a lot, but sounds like some of the church members would rather deal with things that are more impactful for them on a personal level,
Oh, absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
So let's blend the two, shall we? So clearly, you have this conviction of making sure that the social justice movement is furthered by what and supported by what you read in the Bible, right, and what you preach to others. But you also found a mate that seems to be equally driven Maybe in a different forum, but definitely equally driven with themes of social justice. So let's talk about that collective action. What tell us how that took place, that you found someone, a partner, a life partner that also is driven by the social justice issues.
Valerie, I found a life partner that drags me behind. To say equally driven is an understatement. That's not even fair.
Right.
It's more like I'm trying to hold on and keep up with her most of the time. But no, it's a blessing. I mean, it truly is a blessing in my life. And we were friends for a very long time. Because we were engaged in that type of work. And I obviously admire her and the way she does it and how she does it. I mean, I even though I've been acquainted with her for that long, I still stand in awe of how she does what she does. And so but it's good for me because I have someone who understands, right? I don't have to, when you come home, you don't have to go into this long explanation about, well, why is so and so living on the street, that
Mm-hmm.
we already know why. It's, how can I help you, take the next step and figure out, who are you talking to? Or maybe you need to talk to so and so because they've been involved in that, and and we connect each other, and that's amazing. And so you talk about collective action. That's usually kind of what our dinner table sounds like. When we're sitting down and we are kind of processing the challenges of this work. Either she'll say, "Well, have you talked to so and so?" No. You got his email? Yeah. Connect me. Okay. And then I'll say, "Have you talked to so and so?" No. Okay. Same thing. And that's great. And I mean, it's wonderful. And I think that I think in that way that's a good team. That's a good
That's
team.
awesome. That is a good team. A great partnership, especially because of something that's there's so much heart involved. I know
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine the two of you not having a partner that supports equally, right, or passionately, whether or not the results or the output is the same. It's the opportunity to actually engage in something as meaningful as what you guys choose to engage in. And and the fact that Janet is the two of you are in an interracial relationship also makes it quite special.
That's a good way to put it.
How would
Special.
you
That's a
put
good
it?
way to put it.
Yeah, how would you put it? Social justice systems within the family collectively impacting society. It's
it's
like it's
it's
like
great. It
Inception.
is.
It's like
It is.
Inception.
It's
How would you?
good.
How would you? Has that influenced at all how you all approach, how the two of you approach, either collectively or individually, these challenges around social justice?
It has because you know I think both of us in our own right have done our homework when it comes to race in America. I think we've both done our homework. And when I say that, I mean we've both done our homework, not only looking at the big picture, but looking within our own family systems and how we were brought up and what we were taught. And so it really is helpful, when we say, when we get together and we talk about that history and our upbringing and how it's impacted the way we think. And usually it's really, is that what went on? And so, yeah, it's really interesting. Where it really gets interesting is when we, uh, when I go to her family or she comes to mine, it gets interesting all over again, because, you, and really, this is probably like any other family, right? Because, once you tell me the story about your aunt so-and-so, and then, we
You meet
go
on
and
so
I
and so.
meet aunt so-and-so, it's hard for me to act like I don't know nothing about aunt so-and-so when I know, okay. And vice versa. So that's just family stuff. But bringing those two contexts and being able to talk about that and how it plays out, because I think we both recognize, um, I am neither unique nor am I necessarily representative of the whole race, and neither is she.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we put that on the table, then we ask the question, okay, I wonder, does that play out here? Is that what's playing out there? And, you know, in some of our other interactions. And sometimes, I think sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't.
Mm-hmm. And you have a 13-year-old,
We
right?
do.
And there's these really impassioned conversations at the dinner table about social justice.
I
And
like
so,
these words that you're choosing: impassioned, special.
hey.
Those are really good words. That's what I write
Call
in a
it as I
book.
see it. Just call it as I see it. So you're having these conversations, and there's, your 13-year-old Ruby sitting there. What is the message that you're hoping that she walks away with?
So we actually talk about we actually talked about this question. The message that I hope Ruby walks away with is, do not capitulate. Because, and what I mean by that is, you know, on one hand, you want your children to be successful. You want them to be self-sufficient. I mean, heck, ultimately, you want them to be able to support you when you get old,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you know what that takes. There's no secret about what that takes in our in our capitalistic society. You know, you got to make it. You got to get some education. You got to get a good job. You gotta do what's wise with your money and save and and do these different things. And you have to have, particularly as a person of color, you have to have a certain decorum so you don't tick everybody off who you work with, and and you can build those peer networks that help advance your socioeconomic mobility, right? Now, at the same time, while I realize that for her and I coach her in that, just like you do with some of the Eagle Scholars that you coach, what I want her to understand is, you are a young woman of color. You're equal. Don't let anybody tell you or give you the impression that you are not.
Hmm.
And if they do, you need to take care of that. You need to with grace and resolve, you need to educate them. Okay, don't do not capitulate just because they can make some decision that could ultimately impact your well-being, whether it's a job or something that or an introduction. Do not capitulate like that, because it never pays off. It never pays off.
And well, she's 13, so what's the response?
Oh, you know, okay, okay,
Okay.
okay. I mean, it's like things that my parents told me when I was
Yeah.
13. It's like,
It's a slow drip. It's a slow
yeah,
drip.
it's a slow drip.
It's
That's
all
what it
it
is.
is. It's a slow drip. You're right.
It's a
There's
slow
things that
drip.
my parents have always said and always done that my brothers and I now go, how did it get in there?
That's right. Exactly.
Like I sound just
Where
like
did that come
dad.
from?
I
Yeah,
sound like
that's
mom.
right.
What? Yeah.
I've
So it's
become
a
my
slow drip.
parents. That's right.
There. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's creating the groove. You're
yeah.
working the
That's it.
groove.
That's it. That's a good way to put it.
So beyond Ruby at 13, you also have another set of young people that you're responsible for, right? You're the executive director of After Eight to Educate. So talk to us about what that program does and who's it there to serve, and what impact has that had for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very, feel very fortunate to be a part of the organization. I joined the organization in October of 2018. And After Eight to Educate it's a new organization, a new nonprofit in Dallas, and it is essentially what we call an umbrella organization. This is kind of in the terminology of collective impact, which simply means that we're not trying to recreate the wheel, right? Um, the problem that After Eight seeks to address is uh, homelessness among high school students in Dallas. There are, all throughout our high schools in Dallas, there are students who are unhoused, or sometimes we say unsheltered, and in some cases unaccompanied. And what that looks like is, there are students who may be couch surfing. That's usually what people are familiar with, particularly if you've seen the movie, I think it's Blindside. There are students who couch surf, because, uh, their parents are either not in the picture or in some situation where they can no longer take care of them. There are students who are living in cars, believe it or not, and still going to high school. And so the school district keeps track of those numbers. And unfortunately, those numbers have stayed pretty steady for the last few years. And so a businessman, private businessman named George Baldor here in Dallas, began asking some critical questions about, why is this number the way it is? What can be done? And so the outcome of that was After Eight to Educate, because what he found was that there are resources. There are a lot of good organizations doing amazing work among this population of young people and supporting them. What he found is that there seems to be a lack of resources after a certain time of the day. So, during school, a school campus is a safe place for many students from 7 a.m. to almost 7 p.m., to be honest with you, particularly if you are involved in extracurricular activities. And then there are after school programs of all sorts. But after 8 o'clock, all that pretty much stops. And what happens to that particular student between 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. the next morning is just as determinative of their education as what happens between 7 a.m. and the end of the school day. And this, as an educator, if a student, hasn't had anything to eat, hasn't slept, is constantly under stress, that student's capacity to learn is going to be diminished. It's going to take an impact. There are some exceptions, and there are some students who do it anyway, but that's what you can expect. And so After Eight is here to, as an umbrella organization. We brought together several organizations who work in this space. We've kind of asked them to come under one roof, work on this problem together in order to increase the impact and make sure that students in our school district who are dealing with homelessness have the supports they need to complete their education, because we understand education is a pathway out of homelessness and poverty. So that's what we do.
Wow. What what kind of things do you do? I mean, I to think about between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. and having no one, nothing to support, to feed, to shelter, to
That's right.
house, to take care when you're sick. Like there's
Mhm.
so many things that could go left, right? And I don't know why we say go left because I'm sure there's some left-handed people or
That's right. They're like, wait a minute, what does that
what's
mean?
wrong
Yeah.
with that? The things that could go wrong, right? Things that
Right.
could not only dangerous and unsafe, but also so disheartening and
Right.
lonely. What
That's
is
right.
it that you all provide for that population to support them?
Sure. So what After Eight has done, along with, in partnership with the Dallas Independent School District, the Dallas Independent School District has several campuses that are no longer being used. They're, they often consolidate, campuses to one or build new campuses, and then, there's a campus left, and sometimes those properties are sold, sometimes they're not. Um, and so uh, George Baldor, along with the help of Trustee Bernadette Nuttall, she was a school board trustee at the time, they identified a school campus that was no longer being used right next to the Cotton Bowl in Fair Park. It was a former elementary school, about 26,000 square feet. And uh, George made the proposal that, okay, what if we took this facility, renovated it, retrofitted it, made it a resource center for these students, and brought in the service provider experts, the program experts who deal with this population under one roof, and coordinated our activity? Could we begin to drive this number down?
Mm.
Could we even eliminate it here in Dallas? And so that idea certainly merited a try. And so this is an experiment. So what we did, After Eight, took an abandoned school building, 26,000 square feet. We've transformed it into a resource center. It contains two parts. Part of it is what we call a drop-in center. And drop-in centers, were the brainchild of a gentleman named Mark Pierce, who was a DISD employee at one time. And they're actually already in the high schools, and all they are spaces where, as you just said, a student who is dealing with homelessness can come and they can get some support. They can make sure they have something to eat that night. If they're short on uniforms, they can get uniforms. If they need to be connected to other resources, they get that. And then they just get camaraderie and friendship, and don't have to explain, okay, where's your dad? Okay, I don't feel like talking about that again. Okay, just know he's not available right now. Okay, and so part of our center is a drop-in center where students can come in as long as they're age 14 through 21. They can get a shower. They can take a shower. It has a laundry facility, so they need a place to wash their clothes. They can do that. If they need clothes, whether it's for school uniforms or leisurely wear, they can get that. There are books to read. There are lockers where they can keep their valuable things if they feel like, okay, I'm walking around with this, I don't need to be. Let me lock it up, make sure it's safe. They can do that. There's a computer lab. So if they don't have a safe place where they feel like they can do assignments or just look up resources or, what have you, they can do that, check email. If they just need a respite, there's a place to do that. So that's what happens in our drop-in center. Next door to the drop-in center is a residential facility that's set up pretty much like a college dorm. It's 2 floors. The bottom floor is kind of, communal space where you come down, you chill, you meet, you eat, you read, listen to music, any number of activities. And then the top floor contains 26 rooms, dorm rooms with 35 beds. And again, for ages 14 to 21. So where we are now, just to make sure I'm clear, we haven't opened the residential center yet. We hope to open that this fall and begin moving students in sometime this fall. And then the drop-in center will also, it had to suspend operations when the pandemic came, but it will be starting again sometime this fall. So hopefully we'll have both those 2 resources 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Wow, that's really great coverage. I was wondering about where do they sleep, but that sounds like that's in the works
That's
right
it.
now too.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. And Billy, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier because I think as you're painting a picture not only of what After Eight to Educate is doing, but also some of these other social justice issues or social injustice issues,
Yeah,
right, that are
that's it.
coming up to the surface, especially now. What are the roles that you see people playing? You clearly have a platform, you have a vehicle with which to deliver, right? Resources, information, etc., to the people who need it. Then you have, members that you mentioned of your church, for example, and I'm sure other people in other places in the community. I might be one of those people too, because I know there are things that I'm certainly not doing what you've described. So, what are the things that you would hope, thinking about the greater population and the different causes or social injustices that are out there, how do you want, or what would you wish for people to take on or for people to do to support making what is unjust just?
Right, right. Oh yeah, I love that. So and again, this is why I wore the shirt. This is why I boiled it down in my head.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to take voting seriously. And when I say that, Valerie, there are a lot of efforts in place to suppress voting among people of color. Um, but what we also know is that there are a lot of people of color who have the right to vote, can vote, who have transportation, who can make it to the polls. They're just not voting. And some of that is probably a mixture of apathy and, okay, I'm tired of this, bickering back and forth, but we cannot get discouraged because to the extent that we make our presence known at the polls, then things change. And when I say things change, once, and this, I think this is what made this clear to me. There was, and I've seen this several times. I've had friends who ran for public office, okay? And they usually they get a campaign strategist and whatnot. And one of the things I wasn't aware of is uh, they can get the voter records they can get a log that shows how many people, even on my street, voted.
Wow.
And what they do with that information, they know they're, voting has been going on for a long time. So, so let's say, for example, you're running for city council, and in the last 10 elections, the winner has won uh, with 1,000 votes. So once you're looking at that log and you see where people have voted, you know who to get after, because number one, all I need is 1,000. That's
Mm.
all I need. And if I'm looking at this area, this area, this area, and that's three, and I can count them up, and I say, okay, that'll give me 1,500. I don't need to talk to these people.
Mm.
I don't need to talk to them. I can get in with this. And that's what happens, because I only have so many resources from a money standpoint, right? I can only pay so many people out there to be canvassing on my behalf, right? So if I'm going to do that, why in the world would I mess with these folk here when I can win with these folk here? So I'm going to send my canvassers right over here. And the reason that happens is because people over here voted, people over here did not.
Interesting. So you want people to get out there and
You
vote.
got to get out. You got to shake up. You got to shake up. Uh, you got to shake up our democracy. And the way to re-energize it is you got to be present. And the way you be present is you got to go to the polls and you got to vote.
Mm. And when you say you got to vote, and I imagine obviously we have a presidential election this year, and but between presidential elections, right, these national elections, we also have a lot of local elections.
And it counts there more.
And sorry, say it again?
Yeah, yeah. The local. When I say vote, you're absolutely right. The local level matters even more than the
Why?
presidential. Um, well, of course, presidential elections are decided by the Electoral College, and that doesn't mean that you should not vote. What it does mean, though, is that my senator, right? My senator is elected by popular vote. Period. I mean, straight up, they got to win the most,
Mm-hmm.
and they are just as influential about what happens in Washington as the president of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, and there's an argument about whether or not you should have two senators from every state, but you got two senators from Texas. Okay. So when we send them to Washington, all right, they have just as much influence on our well-being as president, vice president, speaker of the House, what have you. And so local elections matter.
Okay, so yeah, so you're running down the street after these congressmen, no matter what,
That's it. That's
whether it's to
it.
get you in the academy or whether
That's
it's to
it.
make sure you send the right person to
That's
Washington.
it. That's it. That's
And
it.
anything else, Billy, that you want to share with people? There's obviously so much that you've shared that's empowering. There's so much that you're doing and that you encourage others to do. Anything else that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I got to take my hat off to you. I mean, as I said, I admire what you do and the way you do it. And when I first heard professional coach, I looked at my wife like, okay, that's like saying a chiropractor, right? A chiropractor. Okay, are they really doctors? Right? Okay, no, but getting to know you and being listening to some of those conversations. I mean, it's obvious. Yeah, you are par excellence. You help people elevate. You elevate people's lives, and that's hats off to you.
Thank you so much, Billy. That's so kind. I'm glad that I gave you a different take on.
See, you should be glad, because if it were not for you, I wouldn't have gone out to seek a professional coach, and I did. But that was because of you. Because again, I looked at them like, these guys are like chiropractors. They don't really.
There. I'd heard some things, but I thought, you know what, Janet, what if?
That's right.
But I think to your point, and not no different than what I think you're doing. Yeah, the idea of elevating people is important to me. I really want to inspire and activate people to come alive. That's kind of my tagline, and for me, it's important to see where's the light out. You
Right.
know, it's kind
Right.
of like in the string of Christmas lights. Sometimes, especially the old timey ones, when one
Oh,
bulb went out, the
whole
whole
thing went
thing's
out. That's right.
useless.
That's
And I
right.
think it happens to us too, as human beings. If there's an integral part of us that goes
Hmm.
out, that's not working, that's somehow short circuited, and we don't get it back online, we don't take a look at it, it impacts the quality of how much
Absolutely.
of the output, right?
Yep.
Even if there's one dim section,
That's it.
it makes a difference. And so I think what
That's
you
it.
shared today is definitely shedding some light on situations, on issues, and topics that people may or may not be comfortable addressing. I don't think that everybody has to come alive the same way, but I
Right.
think what you've done is shared here's some areas and pick one.
Yeah.
Just pick one and
That's
go
it.
do
Pick one.
something.
Yeah.
Pick
You could
one.
close your eyes and throw it. Throw it in. I mean, you will hit it. I mean, just pick something and start. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so glad that you and Janet are doing something not only for the young people of this community, but also really like shaking things up. The model, the behavior, the modeling that you're doing, the passion in which you all share and speak your truth and speak your beliefs, and the conviction in which you do so, I think can't help but shake things up. And if nothing else, I think to your point as a pastor, what you can do is help light the spark for other people to go out and do something. And we
Absolutely.
need more and more of that. So thank
Yep.
you so much for the work that you're doing out there, Billy,
I appreciate it.
and
Thank
for
you.
sharing it with us. Man, this is like a big coup. This
It
is
was
like one of
good.
those interviews is like, what, you got Beyonce? so I so appreciate you saying yes. I don't take it for granted when somebody says yes. I do want to end with,
Uh-oh.
yeah, I know. I'm going to take a little curveball here. I have this game called We're Not Really Strangers, and every once in a while I like to pull it out and
Okay.
play a few cards with people. So I have 4 cards that I've chosen that are generally just kind of reflection on the experience cards. I just want you to pick one of the 4.
Level 3?
Sorry. Oh, this one here.
Yeah.
They're all level 3, so
Oh,
just
they're all
pick one
level
of
3.
these. Which one? One, two, three,
Uh,
or 4. Pick a number.
2.
2. All right. Let's ask this question. All right, Billy, here's the question.
What is a lesson you will take away from our conversation? Do not sign a non-disclosure agreement with Val. Get a lawyer before you come over to this show.
Billy! Don't listen to him, guys. This, as you can see, has not been under duress. He's been willing to say. I just asked the questions. All right,
No,
cool. So,
I
non-disclosure
mean,
agreement. Got it. What else? What else, Billy?
I really love your idea of, you know, these conversations that you would have with anybody. And, you know, it just brings back the value of having this, these kind of conversations. Even if you don't, record them or put them on Facebook, it just brings back the value of having these conversations, because to me, those are the roots of collective action. So lesson I take away is I need to have more of these conversations that you're having.
All right. You're welcome back anytime. You could even start your own podcast, Billy. I could also see that. Who knows? I'm not kidding. I'm serious. And I think a lesson from me that I take away from this conversation is I'm not, I wouldn't wear a t-shirt necessarily. No offense, but and part of it is my dad. My dad, I'm going to blame it on my dad. Although I'm old enough to have debunked most of the stuff that my dad tried to make us do. But he was always like, "Oh, I'm not a flag waver," that kind of thing, which is cool. And I think to some extent I have adopted some of those same policies per
Sure.
se. But I think a lesson I take away from this is to make it clear to people that there's a way to have their voices heard,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's a responsibility. And whether that's through your family, as you and Janet are doing with Ruby, whether that's through your church, as you're doing as a pastor, whether that's through a nonprofit organization, because that's your vehicle to support those who are unsheltered in Dallas, or the connections that you have through the university or through some of the contacts that you've built, that each of us have a responsibility to use the community that we have, right? The platform that we have, and
Mm-hmm.
get into that collective action that we
Right.
all have access.
Yep.
We all have access. So
That's
thank
it.
you so much for bringing that to light for us. There's a lot of platforms. Just pick one. Go
That's
for it.
it. Pick one.
Yes. Thank you so much, Billy Lane.
It's been good, Valerie. I got to get on to my next Zoom
I
meeting, but I deeply
absolutely.
appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Time to Come Alive. Please make sure you subscribe at www.timetocomealive.com to get this straight into your inbox, or you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Have a wonderful rest of the day, everybody. Bye.